share with you guys. We got a whole class today. What shall we do? What shall we do? Yeah.
Can we talk about the 70 faces of the Torah?
We could talk about that, yeah. Want me to talk about that a bit? I'm thinking a bit that because I'm not in the biggest resource state in the world, to teach something that has a powerful, like a strong outline, rather than my usual go with the flow class. But maybe I'll share a few minutes on it. And that is there's 70 faces for every word, every letter really, and every word of Torah, which makes the understanding of a particular sentence in Torah, to understand what God truly meant by that sentence would become almost impossible. Because if you have every word with 70 possible meanings, so if you have a sentence with 7 words in it, it's untranslatable. You can't translate a sentence at all. But someone might say, well, what's this book here? I mean, isn't this the translation of the Torah? I think it says so here. Newly translated. Maybe this is a translation. Well, how could that be? What's a better word for a translation? If every word has 70 meanings, what would be a better word for a translation? Interpretation. Yeah, this is really an interpretation of the Torah. This is not a translation of the Torah. The Torah was not translated until the Greek Empire. The Greeks caused the 70 elders, who are the high court, and they locked them each into separate rooms to make sure they wouldn't fool around with the translation, and they forced them to translate the Torah into Greek. Now that's pretty tough, because they said if their translations came out differently, they would kill that rabbi whose translation came out differently. What are you supposed to do? It's never been translated before, so these 70 elders always read the Torah with, as almost like a kaleidoscope. A kaleidoscope's like, the Torah would be much more of a kaleidoscope than a book, if you read it with the way it was really meant to be read. And so they were used to the Torah as a kaleidoscope. And here, under the threat of death, they all have to translate the Torah and have all their translations match. Whoa, that's a scary, tall order. But they call it a miracle, but it wasn't a miracle. When you know about the minds of what it took to be on the high court of 70 back then, which many of them were not, maybe not by the Greek time, but there were prophets as well on that court. And they knew every language, they knew black magic, all the Kabbala, and they just knew everything. You had to know everything to be on that court. It was an extremely high, what's the word I'm looking for? Prerequisite of what it takes to be on that court. So because of their genius, and because of their vast knowledge, and because they understood the Greeks and they understood Gentile minds, all 70 Torahs came out the same. So they changed a lot also because there's words in the Torah that would just throw them off. Like, for example, the nun in the word na'aseh ha'adam, which means let us make man. It's plural. It's God saying, let us make man. That would really throw off polytheists who think they're getting a translation of a monotheistic group. Why do we have let us make man when it's God speaking and there's only one God? So there shouldn't be a nun there. It should be an aleph, e'aseh Adam. I will make man, not let us make man, or we will make man. But every single sage who wasn't a dope, he didn't translate that nun. And he wrote, God said, let me make man. That's it. They just kept it nice and simple. And they got all 70s. I don't consider it a miracle. I consider geniuses being able to do it right. If you're wondering what this book is here, this book here was a meeting of some great minds, one of whom I'm close with. And he used to work for Aish HaTorah, Rabbi Malinowitz, if you ever heard of Rabbi Malinowitz. And he, amongst others, they sat around a table together with all these different commentaries. Because they also, in our generations, we don't know the 70 faces. But we know many of them. And so they were playing around with each word, trying to figure out the following. How can we get a Jew to read this book and get as least confused as possible? That was their goal. I mean, it wasn't to give you what's actually in there. That you can only get with Hebrew. And even with Hebrew, it would take forever to get it. Their goal was, how can we get people to read it and make as few errors as possible? So I hate to bunk your high or burst your bubble if you've been all excited about reading the Torah in English. But what you're actually reading is just a troubleshooter's guide to the Torah, or how to make sure you don't get this thing completely confused and backwards. Clear? And therefore the importance of learning it in Hebrew and learning your Hebrew so that you can learn it in Hebrew, so that you can be as wild as possible when you translate in your own mind. And you want to be as wild and like expansive as possible when you read from the Torah. Certain things are just halacha. So when it's just a halacha, so yeah, there's 70 faces to it, but there's not 70 faces to that particular mitzvah. There aren't 70 types of tefillin. There's one type of tefillin. There is an argument actually on the order of the parshas, of what order they should be in, which isn't much of an argument today. Because they found archaeological tefillin, like at Masada, they found tefillin that were according to Rashi, those who are wondering. So you can feel confident, those men in here who have been wearing Rashi's tefillin, which every man does. It's just a question whether you add the other kind.
Wait, but the parliament was still intact?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but you could at least see.
Why is that?
What?
Not necessarily hopeful.
I'm sorry?
Rabbi Tom's parents had tefillin. I mean, there must have been two types of tefillin for years. It didn't start by Rabbi Tom, he said.
That's right.
So I'm sure.
Where it started, I don't know, but I'm just saying that people shouldn't feel bad who don't wear Rabbeinu Tam. I wear Rabbeinu Tam. I wear two pairs. Yeah.
So if there's like 70 different ways to interpret each word, and like versus like interpreting something literally, metaphorically speaking, and then you said like, well, the mitzvahs themselves are like absolute, like you can't like do tefillin.
Well, because we have exact instructions. That was given, like Moses came down and said, here's tefillin, this is what we're going to do. When you make the menorah for the temple, like it says very clearly. Now, it says, put a bowl, put a flower, put a bowl, put a flower. Okay, there's a lot of interpretation of flowers. So Bezalel made the flowers out of however.
But aren't there more?
Actually, I think God made the menorah. Didn't God make the menorah? We have a tradition that they couldn't get it right.
No, aren't there more?
And they finally said, just throw the gold in the fire, I'll take care of it.
Don't you think that there's like more mitzvahs that are kind of more open to interpretation?
Mitzvahs themselves?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a mitzvah like being kind to your fellow person, that's definitely open. But a thing like, for example, a ritual slaughter is not really open for interpretation. You can't have a nick on the knife, because it could cause pain to the animal. So the knife has to be perfectly smooth. Yeah, so that's an example of one that's just, there's no other interpretation than no nicks on the knife. But yeah, if the Torah gives a commandment, there's not a ton of room there for the interpretation. On a commandment. Only because we have an oral tradition. If we didn't have an oral tradition how to do, like for example in Shabbat, it says not to do malacha. And there's 39 principal acts of malacha that we learn from the oral law. Torah just says malacha. Now, there's 70 ways to read the word malacha, I imagine, if there's 70 faces for Torah. So then you could get really loose about what it is you're not going to do on Shabbat. But for all the years, without any argument, all the years, all the rabbis have passed on a transmission of these particular 39 creative acts. It's not that difficult because the Torah gives a context for malacha. The context is what it takes to build the tabernacle. So all the acts necessary in baking and all the acts necessary in tapestries, making tapestries, so it would include dyeing and stuff like that, working with gold or working with all the things necessary to build a tabernacle. That's what malacha is. So the rabbis came up with 39 ways to make, everything you'd need to make a tabernacle would take 39 principal acts of manipulation. Back to the 70 faces. So it's actually considered a fast day. The day the Torah was translated into Greek is a fast day in Judaism. Very few people fast on that day. I've never fasted on that day. I don't think I've ever even met anyone who fasts on that day. But it's called a fast day for the holy. It's the holy man's fast day, who's so sensitive to Torah, whose love of Torah is so complete, whose connection to Torah is so whole, that he fasts on the day the Torah was translated. And it's considered not a translation, and it's also not called an interpretation. You know what they called it? A castration. Because the Torah is a wild animal. Torah's a wild. If you got 70 faces to Torah, that's a wild animal. It's got amazing possibility there. But the second you lock it into one language, you've now neutered a wild animal into one, kind of one-dimensional translation.
Like 2 months ago, right? That day?
Yeah.
What was it called?
What day? It's either the 8th or 9th of Tevis. I forget which one. 9th of Tevis, because the 8th of Tevis also another one. It's 3 in a row.
It's been a long 2,000 years.
Yeah, I forgot what happened on the 8th. The 9th of Tevis was the Torah translation, and then the 8th of Tevis, something else. No, that was the 10th of Tevis. The 8th of Tevis. Anyone know what the 8th of Tevis is? It's a whole other thing, another calamity. But it's amazing they consider this a calamity. Yeah, that's one of our calamities, was the translation of the Torah. Yeah.
Are the 70 faces why it's called Septuagint?
It's because of the 70 elders that translated it, who managed to pull off this incredible feat of translating the entire 70 faces one way.
So none of them made any mistakes? They were all maybe accurate?
No, I wasn't there. It could be the Greeks gave them a margin of error. Like, did they have to have every single word perfect? I doubt it. But they probably had to look at least, it had to read the same.
Yeah.
And they all read the same.
Oh, I know. I think it was the day that there was no more food.
Really?
They were teaching.
Could be. I can imagine that would be a fast day for women, Jewish women. No more food. That would make my wife fast. No food.
Or a fast day for everybody.
I think that was a fast day for everybody. No more food. It's the no more food day fast. I think there are poor people all over the planet having that fast right now. Today's a special fast, kids. It's the no more food day fast. Anyway, there are clues to the Hebrew language that do speak of certain things. Like, for example, the letter Pei and Resh. Letter Pei and Resh will come together in the Torah. Will always have something to do with separation or sections, or maybe an item that has sections. What? Papar, very good. Papar. Papar is a butterfly. Yeah, and it's certainly a perfectly halved, sectioned thing, that works. Fruit is perot in fruit. Not all fruit, certainly citrus comes in sections. But also every piece of fruit's kind of separate than the one next to it. Did you hear me say something just now? It's, what did I say it is? Separate. Separate. How do you say the word for fruit in Hebrew? Perot. Okay. Perot. What if we played with the dots here, and we got rid of that one, we get rid of that one, and we get the O and we turn it into an U. What do you get? Fruit. Fruit. Or we took perhaps the pei and the resh, and we add a tet to it. And now you have the word prat, which means
Exclusion.
what does prat mean?
Exclusion.
Yeah, it means part. See the word part there? Part. Being a part, there's individual and then there's klal, there's being part of the whole. So the individual is a part. Anyway, you'll see that even in English, particle, right? Partition. You see the pei resh works. Well, it just keeps working. Just keeps working. Goes into the Romance language. Any Spanish speakers? Yeah, who's a Spanish speaker? A real Spanish speaker. Excellent. Fluent in Spanish? Not fluent, you're fluent, Aaron? Jonathan, you're fluent? Yeah. Yeah, what do you got for, fruta, very good. What do you got for particle? Parta, okay. How about, we got anyone good in German, Germanic languages, stuff like that? That shouldn't relate. Spanish language and Germanic shouldn't go together. Like Germanic, we use the word water, which is from Wasser, which is Germanic. Anyone know any Germanic languages? No?
Obst is fruit.
How do you say it?
Obst.
Obst, see? It has nothing to do with that. And what about part? Tile? Now it all makes sense. Anyway, I've had other people in the room who spoke. Anyone else have a language? Frucht. Oh, where'd you get obst? Oh, it is. How about anyone here speak Farsi? Farsi. What's the word for fruit? What's the word for fruit, Dennis? Mive? Keshmesh. Keshmesh. Okay, that didn't work. How do you say part in Farsi?
It's also keshmesh mive.
Part is filthy. I think it was the resmat.
What?
Resmat.
Smart. It just didn't go. Okay, I think we nailed this. Let me just think if there's something else we have to deal with. Oh yeah, oh my gosh, of course. Very important. We have a tradition that's not just a tradition, it's a story in the Torah. The story of the Tower of Babel. What happens in the story of the Tower of Babel? Well, it's a very quick story. I'm not even going to open it, I'll just tell it to you real quick. And that is that the whole world was of one language. That's what it says. The whole world spoke one language. What does the whole world mean? I don't know, but I imagine what they're saying is the main body of civilization spoke one language. That area was somewhere around the Middle East, according to archaeologists, certainly according to Torah, that there was an area of civilization, and that was this area. Not necessarily Israel, but including Israel. They all spoke one language. And what happened was they took that unity, because language unifies people. If I can't speak the same language, I know they say, language is through the eyes, and that's cute and sweet when you're on a trip and, having a smoke and a cappuccino with someone who you cannot speak a single word to. But it's kind of hard to create anything without language. If you and him wanted to build something, you couldn't really get to do it so well because you can't communicate. Communication is the key to unity. And we all know that in marriage as well, and in families. Communicative families do better than families that are not very communicative when it comes to unity. So it says that the world was of one language, and they were unified. And they chose to build a tower. The tower they chose to build was in order to fight God. Why? Because they didn't want to get spread out and separated. They didn't want that God should somehow like disunify them. I don't know why God would want to disunify them. It makes me want to open it. So I'm going to open it.
But like in doing that, that's exactly what happened.
Right. So it says, the whole world was of one language and of common purpose. And it came to pass, when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled it. That's Iraq today. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire. And the bricks served them as stone, and the bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, come, let us build a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. Strange. It's like the first city. It's also very weird how they didn't say, let's build a city and then let us make bricks. They're going for the bricks first. And then they're like, oh, let's build a city. Now that we got all these bricks, hey, what are we going to do? Let's make a city. It's strange, this opposite order of events here. It seems their minds were so set on an industry. Like the people got together and they're going to use their unity for industriousness. They're going to be industrious. Let's make bricks. Later it's, well, let's make a city. And let's make a tower. I don't know what they're planning on doing with that tower. But we're going to make a tower. And a tower with its top in heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. And it makes a name for them. I mean, this is like literally talking about the World Trade Center here, or the Empire State Building, or the Sears Tower in Chicago. It's just saying, like, let's use our unity for ego. You know, seems what they're saying here. And if the ego's powerful and strong and they succeed in building this giant city with a giant tower that you can see from anywhere in the world, so now you are able to protect your dispersion because we're all gathered together in a city. We're not in the suburbs. We're all gathered around this cityscape. Now we have an oral tradition that they were so into this that they would mourn if a brick fell off the tower. They would carry these big bricks up the tower. And if a brick fell off the edge of the tower, there was a set mourning period for the brick that fell. But if a person fell, there was no mourning period. Keep building, keep building, keep building.
So it's like the tower is more of importance than people building.
Yeah, and it teaches us another amazing lesson.
Actually complimented the tower in the Baptist story, but there's all this bad.
There's an amazing lesson in this, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the industrial world, the industrial complex, and the swallowing up of individuality in its wake. There's a very deep lesson here in like your individual power, which you know I'm always coming back to that theme. Those were my regular students, but it's right here. It's showing the individual's loss of potency in deference to the building and the potency of the industry and the industrial complex. That's what's going on here. It's like, how long do you think the people on the space shuttle stayed in the news versus the NASA program after the space shuttle exploded? Who do you think won with news time? Who stayed in the news longer, the NASA space program or the people who died? The answer is the space program was in the news some 3 times as long as the people who passed away on the space shuttle. It's the system. Babel's the system. Babylon. You see, the reggae stars got it right. You know, we're leaving Babylon, going to the promised land, singing Exodus. Boom, 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 boom. Movement of your people. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Right. Open your eyes and look within. Go. Are you satisfied with the life you're living? Right? It's the individual. Are you satisfied with losing all that for the system? Like you're going to let yourself be a cog in a wheel, a part in a greater machine? We know where we're going. We know where we're from. We're leaving Babylon, going to the promised land, singing. Movement of your people. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Exodus. Movement of your people. So, yeah, so that's the Tower of Babylon, is the Tower of Babylon. We're leaving Babylon, Babel, because it just confuses you and it scatters you. And you lose that kind of core energy that's like your personal power. You have personal power. But when you go in and working for the machine, so you lose your personal power. So what happened? They built this tower, and Hashem descended, whatever that means, to the city and the tower, which the sons of man built. Notice it's men, sons of men. Notice that, ladies? It's the men building this stuff. It's not the ladies building this stuff. And Hashem said, behold, they are one people with one language for all. And this they begin to do. Like they had the chance. Because you'd almost think there's something wrong with unity. People get together and now they make trouble. People together is trouble. Whereas God's saying, this is what they're doing. The fact that they had unity would have been a great opportunity for feeding one another, for helping one another, for bringing goodness, for teaching, for recognition of each person's greatness that can be done in a group setting. But instead, it becomes, evil. That unity is used for evil. And how many times in history have we seen human beings gather around things that were pure evil, and yet they somehow get themselves convinced in numbers that it's good. Something about numbers and self-righteousness and doing the exact opposite of good. We all probably, I imagine for most of you, the Nazis came to mind that got a whole swath of this globe wrapped up in this populist movement that was pure evil. But everyone's into it and everyone's doing it, everyone's unified around it, everyone's, got themselves, aligned with the SS flag. But there's other things too. You got whole religions today that are their whole self-righteous postured version of themselves and their lives and their religion is all just based on everyone's doing it. Like what makes it work is that everyone's into it. But at this point, we got 1 billion people being into one thing, you got 1 billion being into totally something else, and they're both thinking that what their narrative is right, which creates strife. It'll I think we're in a world war over this. I think we're right now in a world war over this, over more unified people who get postured around ideas, and then just evil kicks in. So this whole story of unity and the evil that can come from it is a tremendous warning to humanity. And you see, how'd we do with learning our lesson? Not good. Humanity seems to just keep banding around ideas, around religions, around values, or other kinds of, I guess, ethics, if you call those ethics. And then all hell breaks loose. But when you're in it, you think it's reality, you think it's right. I remember my first trip to Europe as a young man, and they were speaking badly about Americans in Europe. And I was indignant. But I noticed after about a week that I was getting a real education about where I'm from, because I was an American, and I knew nothing but what they taught me as an American. And when I got to Europe and they were speaking not so nicely about Americans, I was very upset. But a week later, I was like, maybe you got a point about a lot of the things they said. And yeah, it changed me. I woke up from my American dream. Mike?
What's indignant mean?
Oh, indignant. Insulted. So, and now should it not be withheld from them all that they propose to do? Come, let us descend. Here's the us again. Our Torah doesn't leave out the us parts, because it's reading to Jews, and Jews know that he's talking about angelic forms of the matrix system. Like there's a whole system of creation called the oilamos, the worlds. And so whenever the word Torah says us, it's talking about Hashem using in conjunction his will via this whole matrix system. That's the us. Let us descend and there confuse their language, that they should not understand one another's language. That's the word Babel. And Hashem dispersed them from there over the face of the whole earth. And they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because it was there that Hashem confused the language of the whole earth. And from there Hashem scattered them over the face of the whole earth. They couldn't understand each other, and that began the process called linguistics, where languages formed and evolved. And if you study linguistics, you learn about the evolution of language. Did you know that there is a prince, an African prince who lives in Sfat? You know about the African prince who lives in Sfat? Yeah, you ever heard him speak? So there's an African prince who lives in Sfat. He was he would have been the prince of, or he could very well have become the king of Swaziland in Africa. But he was a linguistic genius, and he could learn language after language after language after language, and it only took him 3 weeks to learn a language. Wow. Fluent. And so he learned language. He just had this weird genius. He was like idiot savant for languages. Anyway, what happened? So he's a genius in languages, and he learns language after language after language. And then he couldn't learn any more language. They had to send him down to, he had private teachers and stuff, but they had to send him to university. So they sent him to South Africa, and he learned in South Africa in university, and he had bodyguards. He was a prince. So he'd walk around, you can imagine walking around university with bodyguards in like silk shirts and like, it was like straight out of that. What was that movie in America where these...
Coming to America?
Back to America it was called?
Coming to America.
Coming to America, an amazing movie. Yeah, so it was that kind of scene. What?
Yeah.
Anyway, they had a break. They were on like winter break. And in those couple weeks, he decided to learn a Semitic language because he had not yet learned a Semitic language. So he was deciding between Aramaic, and Hebrew. And randomly, he chose Hebrew. And he started learning Hebrew on his own. And he couldn't sleep the first night. He couldn't sleep the second night. He couldn't sleep the third night because he noticed there's something there. Now, what do you think the one language was that everyone spoke?
Aramaic?
No, Hebrew.
Hebrew?
Hebrew was this primordial language. It's not a linguistic evolutional language. It is a language that is the key language to the world. So he wasn't learning, like for example, water if just to show you some of the periodic chart, the mem stands for hydrogen, the a yud is oxygen, shin is carbon. Okay, did I make the C the right direction?
Only in Hebrew.
In Hebrew, it's a kaf, but a C, carbon. And so you'll see that, like, for example, H2O is two H's and an O. But if you look at the word mayim, you'll see it actually is H2O. You see that? It's actually made of it. And it's crazy. There's another amazing reason to know Hebrew deeply, because see, every other language in creation is a symbol. The word Wasser has nothing to do with water, and the word water has nothing, the word Wasser or water has nothing to do with two H's and an O. It's a symbol that gets your mind to immediately think of that wet stuff we call water. Just a symbol. Language is symbols. But the word in Hebrew, like for example, the word for a dog is kelev. And the word kelev means kelev, like a heart, which means faithful. And there's no animal that can live with man, like literally live with man. You notice most people don't get married after a while, buy a dog, because it can live with human beings. Dogs can actually be part of a family. Yeah, it's kelev, it's a faithful animal. Cats are not faithful. Dogs are faithful. Yeah, fish are not faithful. Hamsters, not very faithful. Okay? Dogs are faithful, kelev. And you look at the heart itself, the word heart. Oh, here I go. The word heart is 32. That's the word heart. And it's the same numerical value as the word bechi. Bechi, which means to cry, is 2 plus 20 plus 10 is to cry. The word heart and cry come out the same, meaning it just keeps happening and happening. And the more you know Hebrew, the more you start to see that it just keeps going and going and going. And there's really, really amazing stuff there. It doesn't exist in other languages. Other languages are symbols. So bottle doesn't mean anything, but in Hebrew, bakbuk is the actual sound it makes when you pour it. Bakbuk, 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 bakbuk. It makes that noise while you pour it. That might be a modern Hebrew word, the word bakbuk. I think in Hebrew it's sluchit, or I'm not sure what it is. But anyway, whatever, you're getting the picture of what I'm saying. What?
He was learning Hebrew, he couldn't sleep.
Couldn't sleep. And day after day is going by, and he just can't, day after day is going by, and he just can't get over Hebrew. So he finally, after the break, he goes to the university and he goes to the professors and he's like, I'm freaked out. I found like the key to all language. And the professor's like, what are you talking about? And he shows them and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. And finally he just went crazy and went to the rabbi there, an Or Sameach rabbi in South Africa. And with his bodyguards comes to the door and he's like, you imagine the rabbi opening his door and there's a prince with bodyguards at his door. He's like, can I speak to you, please? And the rabbi's like, okay. And he comes in to the rabbi's house and tells him and shows him everything he found. And the rabbi said, you're on to us. And he said, but the only way you're ever going to figure this all out is in Israel. You got to go to Israel. And he did. He took off, came to Israel, he learned Torah for many years, became a great Torah scholar. His family disowned him. He lost the whole royalty status. Only in recent years, after he got married and started having kids, did his mother acquiesce against the father's will.
Wait, did he convert to Judaism?
Yeah, he's a Jewish convert.
How old is he?
His 40s, probably.
Really big beard?
Nati? No. Yeah, he's kind of stubbly guy. He married this great lady, a Yiddish lady named Shana. You know, amazing lady. You can meet them, go to have Shabbos with them. They're in Tzfat. He has no one to talk to in Tzfat. You know, Tzfat doesn't have a lot going on over there. So he'd be excited to have you if you came. What?
Have his contact information?
Sure. Yeah. So anyway, that's the story of Nati. But quickly, the nations go into 70 languages. Well, isn't that interesting? Because Hebrew, which is the key to all 70 languages, is broken down. It has 70 faces to it. Ah, that's interesting. 70 faces. How many Jews went down to Egypt, by the way? 70. When Jacob went down with his children and all their kids, and it was just one big family. It was basically children and grandchildren. When they all went down there, and you add Joseph and his 2 children down in Egypt, it got to 70. So there were actually exactly 70 people go into Egypt, and then they come out, all these Ivrim, Hebrews, yeah, with the 70 faces. They all come out into this exodus. And then what happens? Way earlier in the story, these 70 nations, right? They became the 70 nations. The Babylonians become these 70 nations. And they, and in the end of days, this is our final statement, in the end of days, all of the world will suddenly have the Hebrew revealed in their particular language. And when Mashiach speaks, when the Messianic era comes, Mashiach will speak in Hebrew, obviously. It will automatically be translated into everyone's brains via the languages that they know. When the 70 languages are finally redeemed from the exiles and the unity comes, but a unity for God, not for industry.
Sorry not to teach my kids Hebrew. I can just like allow them to wait for it.